My retirement with Bill Geiger of Geiger Wealth.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Trump and Kim Jong-un preparing for supper. Will it be their last?
Together again, I kept saying.
We'll get some reviews of that from James Carafano at Heritage Foundation. But in advance of that, over the weekend, Mike Pompeo was on with Jake Tapper on his CNN show and was essentially asked about the administration's posture with respect to the nuclear threat posed by North Korea and, what exactly the Trump administration was willing to do with respect to the range of sanctions that have been imposed, depending on what North Korea is willing to do in furtherance of denuclearization. And here's what Pompeo had to say.
Now, President Trump, after the last summit, he tweeted, quote, "There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea." Does he still believe there's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea, even though Gina Haspel, the CIA director, says North Korea is committed to creating this missile to hit the United States?
Look, having been the CIA director not too terribly long ago, I'm very familiar with the fact pattern. We do know the history. We know the history of the North Koreans making promises, making commitments, lying, taking American money when President Clinton said, "We've got this resolved," back in 1994. This administration's not going to do that. We have charted a different path. Frankly, we've been criticized for taking that path, where we work, we negotiate, and then the two people who can actually effectuate the denuclearization of North Korea and a brighter future for the North Korean people will gather for a second time. We have economic sanctions in place. We know the standard for relieving those sanctions, and I'm very hopeful that we'll make a substantial step towards achieving the full denuclearization in a verifiable way in North Korea. The South Koreans, the Japanese have been great partners in this, and we're very hopeful we can get a good outcome.
Do you think North Korea remains a nuclear threat?
Yes.
But the president said he doesn't.
It's not what he said. I know precisely.
He tweeted
what he said.
there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea.
Right. What he said is that the efforts that had been made in Singapore, this commitment that Chairman Kim made, have substantially taken down the risk to the American people. It's the mission of the Secretary of State and the President of the United States to keep American people secure. We're aiming to achieve that.
For more on this topic and the begrudging respect a lot of Trump critics are giving him for his handling of North Korea to date, we're pleased to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano, Army veteran, and currently the Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, also the author of books Surviving the End and Wiki at War, Conflict in a Socially Networked World, that is. James, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be with you.
So, give us your assessment of how this summit was framed and what you think would be sort of the best possible outcome from it.
Right. So 2 points. One is everything up to this point is just blah, blah. The way the North Korean system works is only the Supreme Leader, Mr. Kim, can decide what the North Koreans are going to agree to. So all the preparatory conversations and everything else, none of that really matters until he decides what he's going to put on the table. That's going to happen today, and within 24 hours we'll know what the North Koreans are really willing to sign up for. There's 4 possible outcomes here. One is they actually make real commitments to denuclearize, to get rid of the nuclear weapons program. The second is, look, we don't get that far, but we make substantive progress. And what I would call substantive progress is the North Koreans putting on the table, agreeing to do something that they've not before, because they've made lots of commitments in the past that they just haven't followed through on or just meaningless. The third is it's just a nothing burger. Nothing really substantive happens. And the fourth is the United States actually begins to backtrack on its negotiating strategy, which is we back off the requirement for denuclearization, we back off the pressure campaign. Of those 4 outcomes, the only one that's really bad is the last one. If any of the other 3, even if it's a nothing burger, if the American interests really aren't compromised, that's really fine. So I think you have to kind of keep those 4 things in mind when we see whatever comes out and grade it against them and not the tweets and the blah, blah, and everything else.
And the Nobel Prize talk and all that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, please elect me. How do you think the Cohens testifying on, at Capitol Hill today is going to affect the meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump?
Well, I think, American politics being American politics, I'm sure the Cohen agreement will drown out anything that happens in North Korea, even if Kim shows up and, hands Donald Trump a nuclear weapon and says, here, take one on me. Just because of the nature of American politics and how obsessively we try to make everything about Trump here, I think that's going to dominate the headlines for 24 hours. If there's no there, then it'll quickly fade and we'll shift back to the summit. But that's just kind of the nature of the political environment we're in.
You heard Pompeo reference the relationship with South Korea and Japan and the partnership that the three countries have had with respect to North Korean denuclearization. How important are those two countries in this effort, and how, if in any way, has the relationship between America and South Korea, Japan, North Korea changed as a result of these talks and efforts?
Well, I don't think the relationship fundamentally has changed, and I think that the strength of that alliance is fundamental to what got us here. I mean, what brought Kim to the table was the realization that there was no path forward for him. He couldn't just keep getting angry because he just couldn't escalate into war, because then he'd lose the regime, which is what it's all about to begin with. So he had no path forward. And part of that was because we had the pressure campaign in place, which include not just the sanctions and not just our nuclear deterrence and not just our missile defenses, but that we had this conventional alliance with these partnerships with Japan and South Korea, which are a very, very solid obstacle. And the fact that the North Koreans and the Chinese can't really kind of divide and conquer those three countries, that's what's got us here. And quite honestly, there's no such thing as peace or stability in that region if the United States, South Korea, and Japan don't go together.
And what about China? You just mentioned it. Trump pushing back any trigger on new tariffs. Is that in part influenced by a desire to get China involved in helping him with North Korea?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think the Chinese have been incredibly helpful in the North Korea talks. On the other hand, they haven't been obstructionists. The assessment at the end of the day is generally that China would actually maybe be happier if North Korea didn't have nuclear weapons. And so they're kind of fine with that. They don't want a North Korea that falls outside their orbit, but a denuclearized North Korea is not a strategic problem for China. The United States has been smart. We've kept this on a separate track. We're negotiating trade on one thing, and we're working on North Korea at the other, and the United States hasn't linked those together, and I think that's smart.
Is President Trump bringing any tourism videos with him? Because remember last time he said, this is what North Korea could look like if you just, stop being a communist country.
From Tower Pyongyang.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I mean,
and all that.
He did the biggest commercial of all, which is we wanted the talks held in Hanoi because the United States is really holding up Vietnam as a model. And the model is look, you can normalize relations. You don't have to change your system. And yet you can, become integrated into the world. And, look, we all appreciate the president's incredibly over-the-top rhetoric. But when he says North Korea has a tremendous economic future, I mean, that's not hyperbole. I mean, North Korea is the poorest, least efficient, and least productive country on the planet Earth, right? So even if they did a modicum of liberalization and they had some integration with the outside world, the standard of living in that country and the economic activity in that country would be transformative. I mean, it would be, when you're the worst performing company on the stock market, a little progress makes you look like one of the big winners.
Might be even enough to get Dennis Rodman to move there permanently.
We could but hope.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Army veteran, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at Heritage. His books include Surviving the End, Wiki at War, Conflict in a Socially Networked World. Jim, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago.